Yes, our favorite childhood animation was actually based on a real life story. I'm talking about the Jungle Book, which was about Mowgli. Now, the person who wrote the novel before the animation or the movie was published was called Rudyard Kipling, and people think speculate that he drew from a real life story, which actually happened. We all know that in the movie and in the animation, in the actual novel, it did not end all that well, but because Disney made it, it had to have a good ending where Mowgli actually went and he joined humanity well. But in real life, it did happen like that, but it did not end the same way. Now, in the movie or animation, we all know Mowgli was abandoned maybe by his parents, and he was raised by wolves until people found him in the jungle, and he ended up living well with the human civilization. And it was actually a good movie. But let me take you back in time to the year 1967 when all of this happened. Now, it all happened in an area in India called Bulandshashir. Forgive my spelling. India has very difficult words. I will put it here. I will put captions of the city itself here. Now it's called Bulandshashir, and it was a district in India in the year 1967. Now, in that year, hunters went out to hunt, and they came across a cave, hoping that they will capture prey. But what they found was even more astonishing. In that cave, they found a small boy who was only not more they found a boy who was not more than 6 years old. Imagine, out in the world, and he was alone. Now, because of how harsh the climatic conditions were of that place, and because obviously since the boy was in the wild, they decided to take him back to a mission station where at least he would get help and maybe find out where he came from. Now they decided to name him Dina Sanichar. They decided to name him Dina Sanichar, which is actually the Hindi word for Saturday, which is the day which they found him. Later, as he continued to live among men and other human civilizations, people gave him a second name, Wolf Boy, because he started to portray animal characteristics. Like, he could not eat he could only eat raw meat, and he walked on all four legs, and he found it very difficult to stand on both feet. So they decided to call him Wolf Boy, with their beliefs that this young boy was actually raised by wolves, which obviously cannot be true. Communication was difficult for Dina Sanichar, or the Mowgli, for that time. It was very difficult because of two main reasons. One, Dina did not speak their language. Remember that they found him out in the world, so meaning he had been out in the world for a long duration of time, and he has stayed a long time without having any contact with civilization. So he could not speak their language, and he did not understand anything about signing. So back in the past, or back in those times, if people could not relate with the common language, they simply communicated with sign language, which was common to majority of people. But because Dina Sanichar was not around people for a while, he found it even more difficult to also do sign language. So people assumed that he was raised by wolves because he only communicated with house and grouse, because obviously wolves do not communicate by talking, and mostly they do not communicate with sign language. So they decided they made rumors that he was raised by wolves. Now, over time, he did continue to live with the humans, and he started developing human-like behaviors. Like, he started even smoking cigarettes, which was unusual, but adopted that culture of smoking cigarettes. Now, let me take you back. Let me expand on this. In that time, Dina Sanichar was not the only boy, or he was not the only child who was in the same circumstance. What do I mean? There were actually two boys and a girl who were in the same situation he was. They were both the two boys and the girl were both found in the wild, and they were taken in by the hunters or the missionaries. Now, the orphanage had taken so many wolf children that many cases like those of Dina and those two other boys, they stopped doing investigation about them because there were so many. People speculate that these missionaries were maybe making up stories of them being raised by wolves, mostly for media attention, because it is not possible for, because obviously wolves are wild animals, and obviously for Dina, he could not have survived on his own for that long duration. But because he was walking on all four legs, people thought that he was adopting that wolf culture, not wolf culture, that aspect of being an animal. Now, those who did not believe the missionaries, those who did not believe the missionaries believed that Dina, all those other children, just had intellectual and physical problems. Now, there were among those boys and girls who had the same situation as Dina. One of them was called Oksana Malaya. Oksana Malaya was actually Ukrainian, and she was born in 1983. People believe that she was raised by stray dogs, and that her alcoholic parents actually abandoned her. Luckily for Oksana, she was taken in by social workers, but like Dina Sanichar, she could not speak and she walked on all four legs. So people thought that she was raised by dogs because of that aspect of walking on four legs like Dina Sanichar. But after years and years of therapy, she actually learned Russian. Yes, she actually learned Russian, and she got a boyfriend. Currently, with what I've done research on, she works on a farm taking care of animals. Now let's talk about a boy who was also in the same situation as Oksana and Dina Sanichar. For if my pronunciation is a bit off, these Indian words are a bit confusing. Now the other boy, he was actually Indian, was called Shamdeo. Now Shamdeo was only 4 years old when those missionaries or those people found him. He was living with wolves, which is what what I've done research says. He was living with wolves in India. But unlike Oksana or Dina Sanichar, Shamdeo actually had sharp teeth, maybe because he had gotten used to eating raw meat or hard things which maybe sharpened his teeth, and he had long hooked fingernails because most likely he didn't know how to cut them or something like that, and he had calluses on his palm, knees, and even elbows. But sadly, he fell into the same fate as Dina Sanichar. Shamdeo died at a young age, and he did not get to live with civilization for that long for him to adopt that aspect of being normal. Now, unlike the movie, we all know in the movie and the animation that it all ended well. Mowgli lived with people and he adopted that human civilization. But sadly, in the true life story or the true story behind that novel, Sanichar died at 35 years old, and he died in 1895. Sadly, because at that time there were many illnesses which were killing people, he succumbed to tuberculosis. And it was sad because majority of his life he stayed without human civilization, and he had gotten so much used into the world. But if it were not for those missionaries or hunters, Dina Sanichar would have continued to stay in those world, and maybe he could have been killed by more illnesses. But on the positive side, at least he was able to stay with humans for his last years on earth, and he was able at least to get that human aspect of him, and he did not die as an animal. If I'm saying that it is not offensive, I'm simply saying at least he died having interacted with people.